fuck do I put this? Oh, alright, glad we got that out of the way. I want to talk about Chef, the movie. It came out in 2014. It was written and directed by Jon Favreau. It has some notable actors like Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson. So it's pretty much just Iron Man 2 if, Jon Favreau was a cook instead of a driver. It also has Dustin Hoffman and Sofia Vergara, so it's got a very reputable cast. So the movie starts out with Jon Favreau playing Carl Casper, a super passionate LA-based chef who doesn't have the best relationship with his son, but does have a good relationship with what he does, which is cooking. Carl and his wife, played by Sofia Vergara, split a few years ago. So now it's like, Carl's super into cooking, but not into his son. And the Sofia Vergara character is like, I want you to have a relationship with your son, but he's too invested in cooking. And then long story short, they end up on a food truck and they travel across the country making Cuban sandwiches. So let me start by saying, it felt like every character was written for the actor that was playing them. For example, Jon Favreau, super father-like figure, who's this guy who's kind of goofy but can be serious at times, playing this chef who's not the best father. He has comedic moments, but more or less he's focused on cooking. That is the thing that gives him purpose in his life. You have Robert Downey Jr. playing a minor role, but he's playing this hotshot, I guess you would call it businessman, who has a bunch of connections. Anyway, he's the one who ends up giving Carl the food truck. But I figure when you have a guy like Favreau writing and directing a movie with essentially just a bunch of his best buddies, he can really do whatever he wants. Which is another reason why I think Favreau's role was just perfect for the relationship and the dynamic that he was trying to go for with his son, because Carl Casper is this guy who knows really nothing else about the world besides cooking. He isn't that good of a father, he isn't that good of a husband, I guess, seeing as how he's divorced. But if you say his cooking is bad, especially on the internet, it is over. Case in point, at the beginning of the movie, a food critic gives him a super harsh review and he goes nuts. And they end up making a funny moment out of it. He goes on Twitter, not really fully understanding how to use Twitter. He thinks he's sending a private message to the critic. It's this super rude, snappy, in-your-face comment, and he doesn't realize he's replying to a tweet that the whole world can see. And meanwhile, you have his son going, Dad, what did you do? Because of course the son is Gen Z, 10 years old, around that age, has a pretty firm grasp on how social media works. So you have this relationship between the two that's honestly very reflective of a lot of the relationships we see in the real world with parents and smartphones now and their kids with smartphones. You have parents who don't fully understand social media and I guess the appeal of it, and you have their children who completely understand it and love it and kind of shape their whole lives around it. And I think that's something that this movie did really well. It really was spot on with the technology to human relationship we see today, because if there's one thing that bothers me about technology in a movie, it's when you can tell that the people who wrote the movie don't fully understand how technology works, and then they base the whole premise of the movie around technology. And a lot of times it comes off as the filmmaker is just trying to show the audience that, like, hey, we're still hip. We understand what a tweet is. We understand what the word viral means. But a lot of times it can kind of come off as passive-aggressive. Like whenever a movie brings a smartphone in and they sort of imply that, the younger generations are addicted to their phones and they can never get off, and technology is some kind of disease. Like, if you're gonna have technology in a movie, just show it for what it is, a means of communication between two people. It doesn't have to be this super blown up, out of proportion thing. Because in the movie, you have Favreau doing what any normal adult in his situation would do. Called out by a critic, he cyberbullies the critic. He accidentally starts Twitter beef. Has his son take a picture of him, asks his son to email him the picture. Like, these characters were spot on. Which brings me to my next point. The drama of this movie was, in my opinion, excellent. It wasn't super overdone, but it wasn't super underwhelming at the same time. It felt like the movie was aware of itself, because the movie definitely had a very lighthearted, comedic tone to it, and it didn't stray too far from it. Whenever it had its sad moments where a character revealed something about themselves or got something off their chest, they didn't milk it out and make it this super emotional thing. It was just a father and son talking about something. Maybe it had some weight to it, maybe it was a tough topic to talk about, but as soon as they got it out, they picked right back up, which is what a lot of these road trip movies do. You typically have a couple characters who have a destination in mind, and somewhere along the way they find out, so-and-so, has a dead parent they're not telling the rest of the people about, or so-and-so, is divorced and hasn't seen their kid in years. Just, difficult topics to talk about, and they just draw them out as much as they can. Which isn't a bad thing, It's all good and well. Dramas have their place in cinema, dramas have their place in the film industry. But this movie knew that that wasn't what it was about. This movie knew that it was just about developing bonds with those that are close to you over, enjoying the small things that you don't seem to come around every day. Which I feel is more or less the drama we encounter in everyday life. Typically, when you have these super vulnerable personal conversations with people, it's not like you rehearse the things you want to say. It's a lot of times difficult to get those things off your chest. A lot of times you sound awkward. And this movie did a really nice job of balancing the seriousness with the humorous awkwardness that comes with those types of situations. Which brings me to my final point, the comedy of this movie. So side note, I feel like a lot of times comedy can be overbearing if you can tell the movie's just shoving it down your throat. If you can go about 5 or 10 minutes and think, oh, when's the next joke gonna happen? I think that's when you know there's too much comedy in a movie. But this movie didn't do that. It didn't hit you upside the head with a punchline joke. You didn't have a formula of a joke being set up as you were watching it. You just had these everyday moments that you laugh at because they're so awkward and wholesome. So, overall, I would give Chef 8 out of 10 stars. Definitely recommend you watch it. And if you agree with any of these points, disagree, whatever, let me know later.